So today our topic is a day begins in the morning, not at sunset and not at midnight. Satan, the adversary, has altered and changed every element of created time. When a year begins, from spring to winter. When a month begins, from new moon to illogically haphazard day on a paper calendar. When a week begins, from moon phases to pagan made gods. When a day begins, from sunrise to midnight or sunset. The hours in a day, from 12 to 24. So we've already covered when a year begins, that's in the spring. When a month begins, that's new moon day. And the weeks begin by the phases of the moon. So I hope you go back and watch those videos that we've already done. Today is a day begins in the morning.
We've all been told that a day begins at midnight. Notice, of course, that midnight only appears because of mechanical clocks. In the ancient times, there was no clocks, and the ancients, the writers of Scripture, could not have referred to midnight, which is an arbitrary thing set by man. They could only have been indicating a day as indicated by the heavens. Midnight is the transition time from one day to the next, the moment when the day changes on the local official clock time for any particular jurisdiction. By clock time, midnight is the opposite of noon, differing from it by 12 hours. Midnight is considered the start of a new day by the modern world. Midnight marks the beginning and ending of each day in civil time throughout the world. As the dividing point between one day and another, midnight defies easy classification as either part of the preceding day or of the following day. Though there is no global unanimity on the issue, most often midnight is considered the start of a new day and is associated with the hour 0000 according to the clock of man.
Okay, sunset to sunset. Seventh day, Sabbatarians rest on the seventh Hebrew day, from sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. It is also observed by a minority of Christians. This is a quote from Wikipedia. Several Christian denominations, such as Seventh-day Baptist, Seventh-day Adventist, Sabbath Rest Advent Church, Church of God, Seventh-day, and other churches of God, observe the Sabbath similarly or less rigorously than Judaism. The Sabbath observance ends at Saturday sunset. This is what we've been taught, and I'm going to leave all these links below so that you can go and study them for yourself. This is from the fundamental beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventists. The Seventh-day Adventist official 28 fundamental beliefs state, the Sabbath is God's perpetual sign of his eternal covenant between him and his people. Joyful observance of this holy time from evening to evening, sunset to sunset, is a celebration of God's creative and redemptive acts. We've been told that a day is from evening to evening. We have been taught that the Sabbath is observed from sundown dark Friday evening to sundown dark Saturday evening. Is this so? Before you answer, let's ask Abba Father to supply us with a generous portion of his set-apart spirit. When does a day begin, according to Scripture? The adversary has counterfeited everything about time that was set in place at creation. No counterfeit is perfect. There are always obvious flaws if you know what to look for.
The first serious flaw in most people's theology is that they generally believe that the word evening or evening means the whole dark part of the night, and that morning means the whole light period of the day. However, the Hebrew word erev means dusk, evening, and Leil, the Hebrew word for night, and erev are not synonymous. Genesis 1:5, Yahweh called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. I was taught that the word evening represents all the dark part of the cycle, and that the word morning represents all the light part of the cycle. But the underlying Hebrew defies this understanding. You may want to pause your video here and examine this graphic on the right, which helps visually explain the cycle. Likewise, the lit part of day is yom, the Hebrew word for day. Bokar is the Hebrew word translated as morning, as used in the creation account, and very simply means only the early segment of a day, or morning, not the whole day, that is yom. The translators have not been honest with the Hebrew words given, and we have been taught to continue the dishonesty. When the Hebrew is honestly examined, and even and to even, day is suddenly lost in translation. Furthermore, there is a Hebrew phrase that means sundown. It is shemesh, sun, and bo, down or set. The phrase shemesh bo is used to mean 3 different points of time: before sunset, as the sun is setting, and after sunset.
Okay, for example, before the sun has set, Genesis 15:12, and that says, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, as the sun is setting, Exodus 17:12. And that is until the going down of the sun. And here you see the sun on this line that represents the horizon. After the sun has set, Genesis 28:11, because the sun was set. If the Hebrew word erev, evening, means sunset, just before, during, or just after, why didn't Moses use the word erev in the 3 verses above? Or why didn't Moses use shemesh, bow, in all the places evening is used? The term even or evening in Hebrew is erev. In some places in Scripture, the term evening means noon, about 3 p.m., about the time the sun hits the horizon, the sun is just below the horizon, or the twilight time from sunset until darkness. That is a lot of different times that one word could mean. The period of twilight between sunset and dark is called erev, which means evening or evening, we've already said. And here's an example in Proverbs 7:8-9. He was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of the night set in. Here's another example, Ezekiel 12:7. So I did as I was commanded. I brought out my belongings by day, as though going into captivity, and at evening I dug through the wall with my hand. I brought them out at twilight.
At what time did the first day of the creation week begin in Genesis 1:3? Without any luminaries in the heavens, there are no timekeepers for the earth. So until Yahweh said, "Let there be light," time as we understand it, that is days, weeks, months, and years, did not exist. Let me ask you, When Yahweh said, "Let there be light," did the light tarry for some 12 hours before it came on, or did it come on immediately? I believe it came on as soon as he commanded it to come forth. Thus, days began, as we understand it, at that moment, because a day did not exist, nor can a day exist on planetary Earth without the sun to mark the day. And again, stop, pause, and examine the graphic on the right to understand this cycle.
This was the first weekday on planet Earth, and it began with light. Interestingly enough, day one also ended with light at morning. Question: if day one ended with morning, which is exactly what it says in Genesis 1:5, when did day two begin? Answer: at morning, the same time that day one ended. Here's a verse, Genesis 1:5, Elohim called the light day, and darkness he called night. We've all been taught, and the evening and the morning were the blank day. This is listed several times during creation week, and we thought that the day began in the evening. But if that was so, then the day would end at evening. However, Scripture says the day ends with morning. In fact, the first 6 creation days all end the following morning. If Moses had meant that the day ended when the daylight ended, which is at even, he would have written Yom rather than morning. The first day began with light. Later there was an evening. And later still there was another morning. And they call this day one.
Exodus 16:22-25. This is the first place in Scripture that uses the word Sabbath. This is the last day of the first 6 days that manna fell. Yahweh states that tomorrow is the Sabbath. Israel was to prepare today, that is the 6th day or preparation day, and lay up for themselves all that remained to be kept until morning. And so they laid up until morning, that is verse 24. And it did not stink as it had all the other mornings they had tried to collect enough for 2 days. Verse 25 says, "Eat that today, for tomorrow is the Sabbath." It does not say, "Eat that this evening," or "this evening is the Sabbath." It does not say that this evening is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Yahweh. It says tomorrow. Neither the Sabbath nor tomorrow began that evening. It began the next morning. Exodus 16:22-25. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moshe. Then he said to them, "This is what Yahweh has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to Yahweh. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning." And so they laid it up until morning, as Moshe commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Then Moshe said, "Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath." And so Yahweh, today you will not find it in the field.
Okay, and Exodus 12 is also troublesome for even-to-even proponents. This is when the death angel passed over. If the Sabbath begins at even, then the death angel went over Egypt on the Sabbath of Eve 15, the day after Passover. The act of judgment and vengeance is work, and it is not a Sabbath activity. So did the Father send the death angel over Egypt during the Sabbath hours, breaking the Sabbath himself, or did the Sabbath not begin until dawn, the morning after the death angel passed over? The remains of the Passover lamb will tell us the answer. Exodus 12:6-10 tells us that Israel was to keep the lamb on Aviv 14 at even, and that's between the evenings actually, which means sometime in the afternoon. They were to put the blood on the doorpost that day, and they were to eat it that night, the night the death angel would pass over. That night was part of Aviv 14. They not to leave any of the lamb remaining until morning the next day. Did that night belong to the next day, Aviv 15, or that day, Aviv 14? Clearly, the night after the evening belonged to Aviv 14 because it is called that night, not the next night or tomorrow night. This is another witness in Torah indicating that the day begins in the morning, not in the evening. And here are those verses, Exodus 12, 6 through 10. Now you shall keep it, the lamb, until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat. Then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire, with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw or boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head with its legs and its entrails. You shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Indeed, the daylight ends at evening or dark, but the next day does not begin until the next daylight. The evening belongs to the day that preceded it, not the following day. Numbers 28:16 and Exodus 12:6 make this clear by stating that the lamb was killed at even, and that even was part of Aviv 14, not Aviv 15. This is also stated in Exodus 12:18, Leviticus 23:5, Numbers 9:3, and Joshua 5:10.
The manna, Numbers 11:32. And the people stood up all that day and all that night and all the next day, and they gathered the quails. He that gathered least gathered 10 omers, and they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. If the day began at evening, was it not possible for Moshe to write the word next before the word night? He wrote the word next before the word day. Again, the day cannot begin at evening, or it would have been written that they stood all that day, all the next night, and all the next day. That's Exodus 10:13, 1 Samuel 19:24, and 28:20 present the same argument.
So we've done quite a few YouTubes about this topic. If Day of Atonement begins in the evening, then when does a day begin? Sabbath begins in the morning at sunset. And when does a day begin? Part 1 and 2. And you can find those on our website and on the YouTube channel. There are plenty of witnesses in Scripture when a day begins. And this is not an exhaustive study. There is a lot more information in Scripture that supports the dawn-to-dawn issue. The adversary has counterfeited everything about time that was set in place at creation. He has changed when a day begins from daylight to midnight or sunset.
And Daniel 7:25 says, And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And he certainly has.
So don't forget to go to our website, lunarsabbathday.com, to access materials directly related to today's topic about when does a day begin. Thank you for being here today, and we'll be back next week, Yah willing.